So welcome, everyone. I recognize some faces and some names. So thank you to all of you who are here today, who I've met before. And thank you to all of you who are here today, who I have not yet met, who have not yet crossed my path. I welcome all of you into this journey of sacred sexuality, into this journey of the erotic. And no matter where you are on your specific journey in this moment, in this year, in your lifetime, you are welcome here. This is a queer, trans, kinky, sexually affirming space. So whoever you are also welcome here. My name is Andrea Devin Bertoli. I am a pleasure coach and sex educator, and I do online workshops each month for free as a service offering to the world to help you explore these realms of conscious, mindful, sacred sexuality. And in today's class, we are going to be talking about the erotic within. We often think about the erotic, especially in this country, as sexual only. But as I dive deeper into this work, the erotic has really emerged as such a broad and beautiful topic. So today's class will be not so much a how-to, more of a, I don't want to say philosophical, because that always turns me off, but more of like some wisdom and thoughts about the erotic. And then we'll also do a 15 to 20-minute practice to get you into your body, to tap into that erotic flow. And I will send you home with the replay of this and also a collection of emails in your inbox so that you can follow up with me, continue to do work with the workbooks, with the videos, with the trainings, and all the other offerings that I have. So again, a bunch of people dropping in. I am Andrea, pleasure coach, sex educator. I have a co-host with me today. This is my beloved partner, co-homeowner, and also fiance. We just got engaged last month, and we will be getting married in October of 2025. I'm going to have Christopher introduce himself.
Hey, y'all. I'm Christopher Brown. I'm a certified sex therapist, licensed clinical social worker in private practice, and psychotherapist for over 20 years now. And I'm here to support Andrea, mostly as admin today, but inevitably I have some perspective on her content that I think might be relevant. So you may hear me chime in. The biggest thing I'll tell you to start, one of the questions I get most often in these chats is, what's the difference between therapy and coaching when it comes to sex? So sex therapy, just like any other kind of therapy, psychotherapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, you name it, is designed to take you from dysfunction to function. What Andrea does is she takes you from baseline functioning to joy. Right. So if you think about that U-shaped experience of eroticism and sexuality, what sex therapy is designed to do is help you overcome dysfunction. But who among us just says, you know what I want for my sex life is I want function. Function matters, but for what? This is where Andrea's work comes in. And her belief and mine is that we change the world a little bit every day by talking about sex. So thank you so much for being here and being an audience. Thanks for being fellow rebels and bomb throwers who actually want to talk about eroticism, which in this cultural moment that we're living in is more transgressive than ever. So thank you for having me. If you have any questions at all, shoot them into the chat. I will try to keep up with them. One thing I'm not great at, I already got one from a person about, hey, my Zoom settings are this. Oh boy, I am Gen X over here. I am not great with the Zoom settings. So sorry if I can't answer your technical questions that way, but any content questions and that sort of stuff, I'm here for. So Andrea, with that, back to you.
Thank you. No need to be a Zoom expert. You're expert in a lot of things, my love. So Christopher will be in the chat. I'll call on him every once in a while to bring your questions into the chat. So if you ask a question, just know I will get to it. Maybe I'm just like in a flow in the moment. Okay. Right. So again, thank you all for being here. This is a fabulously large group of people, which I love. And I want to start with just a little bit of kind of an intro to this work. I know some of you are here and some of you have been to many of our classes before. And so you probably know this already, but if you've never met us, this is a little bit of an intro. When I talk about sacred sexuality or conscious sexuality, if the kind of divinity aspect rubs you the wrong way, this is really about opening you up to all of the possibilities that live inside of you as a sensual person, as a sexual person, as a relational person, and if you want to do this, as a spiritual person as well. My goal as an educator and a coach and a teacher is to really blow your mind with all of the possibilities that exist in you. I am not here to tell you exactly what to do or how to do it or step 1, 2, 3, 4 to help you have the best orgasms. That's part of it. But my job is really to help you open, to be curious, and to follow your own path. So, as we talk about the content that we're going to talk about today, please keep that in mind. This is not a prescriptive type of class. Sometimes that's called for, right? If I have a client with vaginal pain, or if I have a client with erectile challenges, there might be a little bit more of a, okay, here's 4 things I want you to do. But as we think about sacred sexuality more broadly, especially in today's class, it's really about the possibilities. My work is rooted in both the scientific and therapeutic, and also in the esoteric and the magical, right? So you'll hear that in today's workshop as well. So the magical part, the spiritual part is really tantric and Taoist wisdom that has been passed down through lineages and teachers for centuries about this kind of connected divine aspect of sexuality. And also my work is rooted in research, like the Gottmans and other therapists who write books and who do research on what really works for our bodies. How does our body really work? What is the science of arousal, right? So I kind of hold this, I think of myself as like this Venn diagram between like the hippie and the scientific, right? We're going to have both. The other thing to know about this work is that sex is healing. Sex is not just something that we do, it is who we are. And no matter what your specific sexual challenge is, and if you don't have any, awesome, I love this for you. Most of us have something going on. Then knowing that sex can be a gateway to healing, I think is really powerful. So whether that's emotional challenges, relational challenges, trauma healing, physical stuff that we have going on, a lot of that can be addressed through sexual healing, because sex, again, is not just sex, right? It's who we are. It's how we talk about ourselves. It's how we talk to our beloved. It's how we care for our bodies with sleep and supplements and nourishment and exercise. It's also how we love ourselves, love others. It's how we give ourselves space to relax and be in pleasure. It's how we learn how to turn our brains off and downregulate our nervous system. So sex is not just we put, part B into part A and have fun with that for 5 minutes. Sex is really like a whole way of being and a whole way of healing. So I said this earlier, I'm going to say it again just for any folks who dropped in late. You're welcome to keep video on or go video off if you just want to listen to it like a little podcast. That's great. There is going to be a recording. Your faces are not going to be recorded, so you're welcome to stay on. Again, I like to see you. It helps to kind of bring a little bit of a circle together in our virtual world, but your face won't be recorded. Christopher's monitoring our chat, and I think that's it for now. So I'll speak for about probably 30 minutes, and then we'll do a 15-20 minute practice to get you into your body, and then we'll open it up to questions. And these can be chat, anonymous questions, or you can raise your hand and have a little chat with us. All right. Any questions before we get started? Is there anything in the chat, my love, that we need to attend to before we get started? No? Okay. Awesome. So we are going to talk about the erotic within. My intention today is to share this esoteric, wild, beautiful concept of the erotic. By esoteric, I mean, it might not be exact, right? It's like trying to explain spirituality or trying to explain pleasure or trying to explain God, right? It's a little bit big. So again, take what works for you, maybe sift out anything that doesn't, add in what you already know or feel or understand about the erotic for you, and we'll put it together into this little tapestry that we're weaving. This is a huge topic. You're going to have questions. I welcome all of your questions. I would like to keep the questions kind of on topic. Sometimes when we do workshops like this, we get really great questions about, let's just say, erectile challenges or pain with sex, or how do I do this one thing? Those are awesome questions. Please reach out to me directly for those because we just don't have time in these free workshops to offer specific advice. So I want you to think about what the erotic means to you. What might it feel like in your body to have a very erotic weekend, or watch an erotic film, or read erotica? What might it feel like to have sex that is deeply erotic? What might it feel like to have sex that's lacking in eroticism? Right? What does that concept mean, right? And in this workshop and in a lot of my work, I reference Esther Perel, who's a famed psychotherapist and relationship expert from Belgium. She tells us, this is her quote: eroticism is not sex per se, it is the qualities of vitality, curiosity, and spontaneity that make us feel alive. And Esther's work is very broad, but one of the things she focused on a little bit earlier in her career was about infidelity. And she talked about infidelity as, it wasn't that the partner did this and therefore people cheated, or they felt a certain way and therefore they cheated. One of the common threads that she found in her work was that people who had some sort of infidelity, and that's very broad, right? That's a whole nother workshop, was that it made them feel alive. Like that was the common thread. So I invite you in this moment to think about like what makes you really feel alive. And you might think of this as flow state, right? Maybe you're a runner, like my partner who runs marathons. Like I do not. That a lot of runners talk about being in the flow state, right? The runner's high. A lot of people who are artists talk about being in the flow state. For me, it's when I'm teaching. It's like time suspends. I'm in this kind of little perfect bubble where we're just focused on this one thing. I'm not worried about the 4,000 things that are going wrong at our new house. I'm just right here, right? I'm in this flow. So again, if we think about the erotic, not just sex, but as this quality of aliveness that's in us, how does that change what that might be? I shared this in the note that I sent out yesterday about the ticketing. You know, eroticism is a topic that a lot of people have covered. Esther is one of my favorites. Audre Lorde is another one. She's a feminist activist. And her quote that I love that's relevant here is that the erotic is not a question of what we do, right? It's not just the activity. It's a question of how deeply and fully we can feel in the doing, right? So think about the last time you masturbated. Think about the last time you made love to your partner. How present were you? How alive were you? How curious were you in this? We're going to talk about this aliveness. We're going to talk about how to infuse this into your body, and we'll do this little practice so you can start to feel more of it. Some of the classes that I teach are a little bit more, not hands-on, but more direct, right? Like, here's the way to get to multiple orgasms. Here's the way to explore, ejaculation control for men. But today, again, we're thinking a little bit more philosophical, if you will. So right now, in this moment, you are an erotic being, no matter who you are, no matter what kind of sex you had today or yesterday or last year, no matter who you love or who you fuck or what you're doing in this particular moment, you are an erotic being because it is in you. It is this sacred connection. And yet we live in a world that forces us to be distracted, busy, disconnected from ourselves. And we don't get to have, I don't think, enough opportunity to really drop in and notice this erotic energy. I really think of it as like a flow, right? Like I like to use this river metaphor. And those of you that have sat with me before know that this using nature metaphors is a really big part of my work because If you have ever been near a river or been in a river, you know that you can resist the current, right? Like you can stand there and hang onto a rock and be really steady, and it will go around you, but you have to kind of force yourselves to ignore it. But what if you're in safely in a river where you can just flow, right? Or if you're in the ocean and you can just let yourself move in the waves, right? Like I imagine eroticism as that, right? When I can slow down, when I can breathe, when I can notice my body, my sensation, when I can connect with my beloved if we're in the experience together, that's when the erotic really blossoms. We can always go through the motions of sex, whether that's solo sex or partnered sex. A lot of people talk about getting stuck in routine. A lot of people have pretty standard masturbation routines, which is usually quick and quiet and usually hidden and often shameful and secretive. But what if we really lean into that and relax and breathe and be and allow ourselves to be in that river of pleasure? Sometimes, in my experience, I can just touch it. Sometimes I'm fully immersed in it. And sometimes I have to say to Christopher, like, I can't quite catch it. Like I'm here, I'm present, I'm breathing, I'm paying attention, and yet it feels like it's a little outside sometimes. And sometimes it's very easy to drop in, to be in the flow, to feel this like kind of connection between he and I, to feel it in my own body. And sometimes it's not there, or sometimes it's a bit muted. I learned so we were traveling a couple of years ago, and we ended up staying at this hotel that had this really fabulous, like brand new yoga room with all the mats and bolsters and all these things. And it had this beautiful collection of sound bowls that were set out. I've never played sound bowls before. They're like, like the crystal healing bowls, but I've been to sound healings and I kind of know how they work and how they're supposed to sound. And I sat down and I started to play. And I'm not a musical person, not an artist. I don't have that necessarily naturally in me, but I started to play. And once I got a few of them going, it was that same sense of like alignment, of like connection. And that was a very non-sexual experience, but it was that same, to me, it was like that same energy of like connecting to the divine, to God, to spirit, to dropping into this moment and being in this like resonance, right? I joined a singing group a couple of months ago, and sometimes it's silly and goofy and we're out of sync and out of harmony and can't get the beat right and all of that. And sometimes when 10 or 15 of the women were together and all in harmony, it was like this kind of universal, like cosmic resonance. And to me, that is what really good erotic connection feels like. It feels like this kind of central channel alignment with God, spirit, universe, nature, whatever that might be for you. And it's so fun to try and find that. If you do breath work, if you do meditation, if you do yoga, these are other ways to find this experience. If you do psychedelics or MDMA or other types of medicine, that can also help you find this connection that may be sexual, may not be sexual, but you can kind of tap into this like flow of the universe. The psychedelics can help us, it can heighten it and help us access it, but it's certainly not the only way. So if you are sober or choose not to explore substances, you are not limited to that, to not finding it. It's sound, breath, meditation, again, running, swimming, all of that. So this is in you all the time. But this needs to be tended to. And again, we live in a world that is so busy. It's so hard to tend to it. And I get, as I said in the very beginning, to the folks who were here right up, right at the top of the hour, like it's interesting for me in this moment to be teaching in potentially like our most stressful and least erotic week of our entire partnership because of the house and the stress and the deliveries and the everything that's going wrong, right? And there is still this thread between us because when we take the erotic out of sex alone, just because we are not being sexual this week, doesn't mean that there's not this thread that connects us, right? It's always there. And I know that once we get our beds delivered, and once the house heats up beyond the 65 degrees that it's at right now, we will be able to take that time, lay down, be together, and drop back in because we can connect to that thread. Most of us are taught that, again, erotic equals sex. And we're also taught that wanting sex equals being, like the way to get sex is to be horny. And I have such a huge body of work around this, especially for heterosexual couples who struggle with like, I wish I wanted it more, or I wish I felt more horny, or I wish I felt more desire. But the problem with that is that oftentimes the erotic needs to emerge from the connection, right? So I know that I'm not going to just like spontaneously feel turned on this week. This is because I have responsive desire. This is because we have all the brakes on, because we're super stressed. But I know that if I slow down first and connect second, connect to that force, then under that, I know the desire and the arousal will emerge. You can tap into this also by making sure that you're getting enough rest, by making sure you're nourishing your body, by making sure your task list is at least under control, right? We don't always have control over the stressors in our lives, but the things that we can control are the way we care for ourselves so that we can show up and be present. I know that I'm way more likely to be turned on when I've had a full night of sleep. If I am groggy and sore and cranky, like I'm not going to be turned on. It's possible, but it's pretty unlikely. So one of the ways to do this is to really practice every day getting into your senses. What do you smell? What do you taste? Can you find something beautiful to look at? Can you find beautiful things that touch your body, whether that's a shower gel or a scrub, or this is like a very soft cashmere sweater on my arms. These types of sensation can help us drop into our body. It can help tune down the nervous system, remove some of that overstimulation from our thinking brain, get us into our body. I want to pause for just a moment and see if there's any questions that have come up, for anything in the chat that needs tending to before I go on to our next section. Are there any questions that anybody has in this moment that you'd like to drop in?
I have something to add.
Mhm.
Okay, so my audio's on. We're coordinating in the same room here, so you hear some of the back channel talk. We're talking about our it's very sexy Zoom settings. So one of the things that comes up for me, there's not much in the chat. If anything, that we're talking about stimulates a question, shoot it here, and then I'll keep track of it. One of the things that really shows up from a psychotherapy standpoint is, and we kind of adopt a lot of psychotherapy language into common culture. And so one of the things that endures from Freud, so back in the early 20th century, is the idea of sex drive. Okay, so the more modern understanding of sexuality is not sex as a drive. Drive is something that if we don't address it, it causes tissue damage to our bodies. So think food, shelter, water. If I go without these things, I have literal tissue damage over time. Sex is not one of those, core, very basic functions. But what is so if it's not a drive, then what is it? It's a motivation system. So one of the things about your erotic self that I think is really important, that if you find yourself struggling to have access to it, one of the questions I would ask myself in that situation is, are my basic needs being met? Are my basic needs under threat? Right? So if Andrea is kind of mentioning, oh, there's no bed, there's no heat, it's cold. Okay, so in those situations, your mind is going to shift to an automatic response of, how do I protect this body from damage? I literally have to be warm enough not to have my body damaged. I have to have enough water, liquid, food to make sure that my body stays safe, right? Most of us, and again, there's some outliers here, but the vast majority of the bell curve of human beings is not going to be particularly erotic when you're faced with issues of basic needs under threat, right? And so think about that, not just from your individual standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint. If any of you scroll social media or look at headlines, we're kind of being bombarded with the crisis of the moment and multiple crises, right? So it's really hard when we're being bombarded with message of crisis and felt experience of crisis to be and feel erotic. So there is something there that I want everybody to know that, okay, there has to be a fundamental sense of safety for eroticism to bloom. Again, there are outliers on the tail. So I work with kink a lot. So there are a lot of folks in the kink world where danger is a turn on. So again, it's not, the quickest way I can be wrong is say all blank or blank. However, there is a general truth that if we are not having our basic needs met, then eroticism is hard to capture. It's the difference between drive and a motivation system. So if there are any questions about that, shoot them into the chat. But I think that's a lot of what Andrea is illustrating in her opening remarks so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Liv. So thinking about the erotic in new ways also requires us to think about sex in new ways. And this is a lot of the work I do with all of my clients, with men, with women, with couples, with queer couples, everybody, because we are socialized to really think of sex as, kind of, especially in hetero partnerships, but not exclusively. I've definitely worked with queer couples who have this, where penetration is the goal. We do all this other stuff in order to get to that. And that's the goal, right? It's very common, again, across the board. We often think of orgasm as the goal. Orgasms are great. I'm not here to tell you not to have orgasms. But what I want to invite you to do with this big concept of the erotic is really then rethink what sex can be. If the erotic is tapping into our innate senses and our innate sensual self, then sex could be really broad, right? So most of us are taught, not exclusively, but most women are taught that our sex is not really for us, right? Our sexual energy is something that we share or that we give away, or in some cases trade for experiences, money, right? Like we're only a couple of generations removed from that, and we're really only one generation removed from the fact that like we couldn't get divorced and get credit cards and buy a house or start a business on our own, right? So we have this kind of legacy, this kind of socialization around like our sexuality has not been for us for a long time. And I invite you to really reclaim that for yourself. And for men, it's slightly different, but it's just as damaging, right? It's the pressure to perform. It's the pressure to show up in a certain way. It's the pressure to always show up horny, ready, with a hard erection and last not too long, but definitely not too short, right? And there's all this like pressure on our bodies, our nervous systems, and our kind of organic sexual expression that really keep us from having really good sex. And this idea of like, I'm horny or I'm turned on and therefore I need to get rid of it is also very common, right? I need to get rid of it by masturbating really quickly or having sex or doing something else, right? Some people go for run, right? This is like the sublimation of the sexual energy. Like, I'm really stressed out. I'm really horny. I need to go run and like burn it off, right? But I invite you to feel that energy as life force energy, right? Your turn on is not necessarily like just for sex. Like, what if your turn on was actually something that made you feel more creative, that inspired you to do art or go exercise or be a really good teacher or be a really good parent, right? What if your sexual energy is your creative life force energy, and through breath work, meditation, sexual practices, you learn to cultivate that energy, that is to build it and nourish it, and also learn to hold it. So that when I feel turned on, sometimes I want to take that turn on and go masturbate. Sometimes I want to take that turn on and play with my partner. Sometimes I just want to feel it, right? It feels kind of like being buzzed, but like better because there's no hangover and there's no chemicals, right? It's a really fun experience to learn to cultivate it, right? So it's really so part of this work is learning how to be with your desire and your arousal. Where are you feeling it in your body? Are you feeling it in your genitals? Are you feeling it in your belly? Are you feeling it in your heart? Or is it more of like, I've been listening to a lot of fairy smut recently and realized like I was super turned on in my brain, but I wasn't like connecting it to actual play or to my actual arousal. So it's learning how to notice it, learning how to feel it fully without necessarily needing to do something with it, right? Maybe you want to dance. Maybe you want to just go for a walk. Maybe you want to just feel it, or maybe make a really good dinner. But you can like lay in that river of arousal, like lay in that experience. And maybe you want to bring it into your partnership, but maybe your partner's not on board. Maybe you do some parallel play where it's a mutual masturbation session or a masturbation session where the other person is there just holding you, right? Maybe you take a shower together or give each other a non sexual massage. It allows us to feel the erotic without necessarily making it sexual. It also invites you to reconsider the idea of orgasm. And this is a whole separate class. You'll get it in your first email about really exploring multi-orgasmic possibilities for all bodies, but it's also about kind of reimagining what an orgasm might be, right? A lot of us learn to have orgasms in very specific, very short, very direct ways, but orgasmic energy can flow through us and you can have whole body orgasms. You can have non-ejaculatory orgasms. You can have nipple orgasms. Are those, the same? Not exactly, but it's another way to kind of drop into this pleasure. And like Christopher was just saying, so often we're just bombarded with stress, and therefore our desire can't emerge. And so I can imagine, we haven't talked about this, so we'll see. But I can imagine that in a few days, we just got the call that our beds will be delivered Wednesday. So I can imagine on Wednesday, our house is finally warm enough. We have our beautiful beds, and we get to lay down together. And for that first hour, it probably won't be, sex. We'll probably talk and snuggle. Maybe we'll take a nap because our nervous systems are so fried right now. Maybe we'll just stare into each other's eyeballs. Maybe we'll do some play. Maybe he'll touch me. Maybe I'll touch him. But I can imagine us being in bed for a couple of hours and actually not having sex, right? Not having penetrative sex, but still feeling so connected, so tuned into each other, so erotic because we both have so much like unwinding to do in this moment that a few weeks ago before we moved when everything was like fun, we were having more sex and it was really fun and playful and we were making out randomly throughout the house and cleaning up stuff and making like it was way more playful, and right now we don't have that. So we need to start kind of from this foundation of this connection, and then we can make space for the arousal to bloom in each of us.
I got a I got a question
Oh,
that feeds into that.
yep, great.
Okay, I have a very beautiful question here in the text that kind of builds, Andrea, I think on what you just said and then what I had said earlier. And I won't say names because this is being recorded, so I think I know who you are. You can see in the chat, everybody. So this is a beautiful description of long-term chronic stress of the type and level that we've been discussing personally. Like, hey, what if I had been living seasons and years under the level of stress you're describing about moving into a new place that isn't prepared for basic needs? Right. And it's such a good question. And so, my general response to this is when you think about the erotic, this is where what Andrea said at the very beginning, that eroticism ideally, not always, includes sex. I think women in particular, and men too, I know I have done this, we can certainly function sexually without feeling erotic, right? We can lay back and think of England and do our duty, so to speak, but we don't have to be there. We don't have to really be present and involved and engaged with ourselves or our partners. So the question that comes up is, what do I do when I have stacked years and years of this stress? And I'm going to editorialize a little bit, and I feel disconnected from my eroticism. How do I even start to get it back? Okay, this is where we even start with, okay, let's start with, set with eroticism that isn't sex, right? So Esther Perel is one of my teachers, and she will talk about cases, and I've got one that sprung to my mind, and I have my own experience of this in my life, having endured years of asexual relationships where the safest thing for me to do from a motivation perspective was just detach that motivation system from me. Okay, well, once I have detached that, how do I just flip that switch and turn it back on? For the people in my practice, and this is where Esther talks about, she says, what kind of touch do you think you might like to experience? Right? This is like run a hairbrush through your hair. Focus on that sensation. Does that feel good or does that feel bad? For me, when I have felt under threat psychologically or physically, I don't want to be touched because that kind of vulnerability signals in my mind the automatic response is danger. The closer somebody is to me, the more harm they can do to me. So we've kind of got to unwind that a little bit, right? So you start solo, right? You start solo in the privacy of your own space. And I know people who, we would talk about masturbation practices. And I was interviewed on a podcast once, and the host said, I would love to have a masturbation practice. But as soon as I start, my partner gets aroused and barges into the room. Okay, so that then signals threat to that person, right? So we have to have an environment that's safe. I literally used to lock a bathroom door to feel safe in a small space, just to touch my leg to see if it felt good. Right. So that's where you get to start to, reconnect with that eroticism. The first thing I would tell you is echoing what Andrea said, it's there, it's in you. It's just dormant or compartmentalized or frozen. So we've got to thaw that eroticism in a safe space and start with yourself. And don't necessarily start with genital touch, right? So you could start with, if you have access to taking a shower, do I like the temperature of this water on my skin? That's an Esther move. Like start with something in your daily routine that is sensorily based, and then focus on the sensation and see if you code it as pleasurable, neutral, or negative. Right. And so try to find some personal sensation that feels good to you that's private, right? And then as soon as you find it, start stacking bricks one on top of the other of things that feel good. And if you're in a safe partnership, and that's a big if, I haven't always been, I am now, thank you, but I haven't always. So doing this stuff with a partner is trickier than it sounds. It assumes a baseline of safety, right? So if you don't have it, don't start exploring this with an unsafe partner, right? Because then you're going to run the risk of having another bad experience, and your nervous system's going to code that intimacy as threat. So it's a great question, and it's really, really important. So again, if you have gone years without access to your pleasure, start in a safe space with yourself with a basic touch. And when you find something you like, stack the next one. Right. So that would be my advice on that one. So that's a specific answer, but Andrea, that kind of, sounds like what you were just describing. So that's it. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And that's also a really good segue into the next part, which is really about kind of owning your kind of self-responsibility for sensuality and sexuality. But just to bring it back to that question, like, where do you start? Without knowing who you are and what's happening, I don't have a specific answer. But what I would say very generally is, again, building on what Christopher was saying, like what feels good in your body. And I would also invite you to explore different embodiment practices, right? And that can be, so embodiment means simply being in your body And again, most of us don't have a lot of practice with that. I've had a yoga practice for 25 years. And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't maybe, I wouldn't, have this understanding that I have, right? And I have a workshop that's on my Patreon, which we'll talk about at the end, which is sex is yoga and yoga is sex, right? Because the more I study this work of mindful sexuality, the more I understand how that relates to being embodied in my yoga practice. And just like you can show up to sex and just go through the motions, you can also show up to your workout, whether you're lifting weights or going to yoga or going to martial arts or running, completely mindless. You can show up to your beautiful dinner that somebody made for you completely mindlessly, checking your phone, stressed out about email, not engaged with the flavors of the food or not engaged with the physical workout. You can also bring mindfulness to literally any task, any practice, right? Mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful, more mindful yoga practice. So no matter what your physical activity is, and hopefully it's something, right? We all know we need to exercise for longevity and all that. Maybe it's just a walk, right? Thich Nhat Hanh is a really famous Buddhist philosopher, and he talks about walking meditations. He talks about just sitting and drinking your tea as a meditation. Embodiment can be anything. That is putting you into yourself in the moment, whether that's sipping a cup of tea, going for a walk, doing a yoga practice, or making love. We can go through anything carelessly, mindlessly. And when we really show up with our full mind, body, spirit, sex, then that's when we really have the mind-blowing, ecstatic experiences that so many of us are craving. But if you are stuck in a freeze response, in a trauma response, in an unsafe situation, those are some really foundational challenges that a good therapist can help you sort through. As Christopher said in the beginning, sex therapy and therapy is really where we start to work on unfreezing, thawing out traumatic responses, learning how to feel safety in our body, learning how to communicate our feelings, needs, boundaries. And sex coaching, pleasure coaching is really where we start to expand, right? And I have turned clients away who are not in therapy, but who really need therapeutic support, that's simply just beyond my purview, right? So maybe it's movement, maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe it's some sort of medicine experience, maybe it's a pharmaceutical that helps you feel less anxious so that you can start to feel more safe, right? There's so many options, and I'm not here to tell you which one is exactly right for you. Christopher's taken a more pharmaceutical path in his life. I've taken a little bit more of like a holistic yoga, acupuncture, herbs path. And we're both here today and we're accepting influence from each other in different ways and learning, right? So there's no right answer, but I hope that you find the answers.
Do you have time for me to add or no?
Sure.
Okay, so briefly, I'll give a story of mine in response to a question I just got. So, two things about me. So, I used to identify at a younger part of my life the following way. I used to run support groups. And so, here's how I would identify. Hi, my name is Christopher. My diagnosis is major depressive disorder, recurrent generalized anxiety disorder, alcohol abuse, and dependent personality disorder. My diagnosis today is major depressive disorder in remission. That's it. So I really had to do my own healing from a mental health perspective to have access to my full erotic expression. I was having sex during this period. Y'all don't get me wrong. But for me, alcohol and sex were entwined. Like I didn't know how to have one without the other. That is no longer the case for me. So hold that thought, that picture of me in your mind. Then my previous partnership was a sexless relationship with someone who had profound mental illness and what we would call in the therapy world the multi-diagnostic patient, right? So without getting into her story, that's hers to tell, but that's kind of where I was. And so because of all of that, we had a sexless relationship. And so where I got to as I got well and was well, remember, diagnosis today is major depressive disorder in remission, right? I really wanted to have erotic expression in my life. I understood that erotic expression, sexual expression is a relational need. And I'm like, oh, and learning that, y'all, that was a game changer for me. And I'm like, oh, but I have a partner, again, who's this multi-diagnostic, multi-problem patient, right? And is not available for that with me. And I'm like, okay, so how do I honor this relationship, but honor my need for sexual expression? And that led me to Tantra, right? And what came up for me is this profound grief and sadness that I didn't have a partner who was interested in going down this path with me, right? But what I had decided is I was going to grieve the loss of partnered sex in my life, and I was going to have an expansive solo sex practice, right? Because I realized, oh, I have agency over my eroticism. Okay, so how did I get from there to here? And I'll just tie that up in a bow. So then my former partner turned against me in a really violent way, which required, restraining orders and legal boundaries, right? So then that relationship ended, not because it was sexless, but because it became fundamentally dangerous, right? And so it was very difficult for me. And yet, then after all of that, I met someone who happens to be on this call who is very interested in her own version of eroticism. And so I am very grateful and amazed that I get this, another love story chance with somebody who wants that same expression. But before I met Andrea, I had really resigned myself of, oh, my eroticism is going to be my own and it is going to be partnerless. And while that is sad, it is not hopeless. It was not hopeless for me. And Tantra for me was a great solo sex endeavor where I could be more fully expressed instead of masturbating quickly and quietly in a bathroom, right? Because that was my sexual life from like 13 through that sexless relationship. And I really didn't want it to stay that way. So, again, how do you grieve the loss of partnered sex, right? How do you have your own solo sexual erotic experience? And then within the context of your relationship, can you open? Can you, is your partner able to talk about alternative sexuality? So maybe other person's sex is a possibility. Again, it depends on everybody's relationship circumstance. But it's, again, you don't have to sacrifice all of the erotic if you find yourself in a sexless relationship. Okay, thank you, Andrea. That was the answer to that question.
Thank you. So I want to kind of wrap up our discussion and then we'll go into practice by really acknowledging kind of the through line of what Christopher's saying, which is your sexuality, your sensuality is your responsibility. No partner or partners are responsible for it. And this happens a lot. I hear this from women, I hear this from men, where I feel like I owe my partner, or, oh, it's been 2 weeks, we should do it, or I don't really enjoy the sex that we're having, but I know my partner needs it because they're, XYZ. When we start to think about sex as a to-do list item on our never-ending to-do list, it's less likely to be full of this aliveness that is so powerful. So the way that you start to bridge that gap in a partnership that is sexless or maybe fraught, or you're just going through a tough time, or I saw somebody write about a long distance partnership, is you work with yourself. And there are many practices that you can do. There are many toys that you can buy. There are many breath work practices that we can work on that is really to help you find access to your sensual self. When you come to your partner in your most alive, activated, sensual expression, they are able to meet you there, maybe. And like Christopher said, if you have a partner who is not able to meet you there, then you have a choice to make. You can decide, this is satisfying enough. I love this person. We co-parent, we co-business, whatever. And I'm willing to stay knowing that I'm going to have a solo sex life. Or you can say, actually, like, I'm on this growth path. This other person is not, and maybe we end our partnership, right? Neither of those is a particularly easy decision. But if you believe that sexuality is important to you, and if you choose to cultivate this sense of sexual agency, this sense of sexual self, then it may change the system that you're in, whatever that system is, right? We have to really prioritize sex. We can schedule it. We can talk about it. We can have special play days where we say, okay, Sunday is a play day. We don't grocery shop. We don't run errands. We don't go work out. Like Sunday is for us to stay at home, stay connected, make love, take showers, read to each other, whatever the fuck you want to do to play, to be together, right? We need to prioritize it just like we prioritize our work, our groceries, our whatever else we prioritize, right? Like sex is not something that happens spontaneously for everyone. For some people it does. For often, often this happens early in a relationship. But as we get to know each other, as we, get in a house together and have a million tasks to do, like, unless we set aside time for it, and we had this conversation like 2 weeks ago, like, oh my God, we're going to get there and get so busy that we're not going to be able to have sex because we're just going to be so distracted and having to run to all these stores. But then there's all these other problems. And so we haven't been able to prioritize it. But Wednesday's the day. Wednesday's the day. But this is your responsibility. And so if you find yourself complaining to your friends or to your therapist about, my partner never wants to have sex, my partner doesn't desire me, my partner doesn't show up like this, I want my partner to do this, I really invite you into some gentle self-inquiry. How are you showing up? How are you playing with yourself? How are you giving yourself time and space and energy to explore the aliveness within you? I taught a workshop a few months ago. It was a women's workshop focused on sensuality. And one of the things that happens in heterosexual partnerships is that oftentimes, and not always, right? But I've seen this enough to see a pattern, is that women really expect their partner to like always initiate, always set up sexy time, like always be chasing, like always be wanting. And the women don't, right? They're just like, are you going to come get me or not? And one of my friends said it really lovely. She said, oh, like I have to put my energetic glitter on so that I can show up to my partner sparkly. Right. And I loved that phrase. Thank you to my dear, dear friend who gave me that phrase, because yes, you are responsible for your own sparkle, right? And when you show up in your full sparkle, what is possible in your partnership is maybe to be determined. The other big part of it, and of course, this is coming from a coach and a therapist, like literally all we do is talk about sex when we're not talking about getting the heat to work at our house, is you have to learn to communicate about sex in totally different ways. We have to talk about it. It cannot just be spontaneous. It cannot just happen. Sex is natural. We are designed to feel pleasure, but sex also requires the work of the communication, the consent, the boundaries, the edges, the overall discussion of what you both want in a sexual partnership. Communication is so, so foundational. And this is where a good therapist or a good coach can really help you start to have those types of conversations. I also want to say, and this is my experience, and also I know so many other people have had this experience, is that sometimes when we start down this path of sacred sexuality, it's not all sunshine and rainbows and orgasms. I have had some of my most profound sexual experiences while crying hysterically. Whether I'm crying and we move into sexual play, or whether we're in sexual play and something comes up and then I start crying, or whether I'm deep in sadness, or whether I have some other sort of big feelings, right? Like there's so much that can emerge when we start to slow the fuck down, really pay attention, really tune in to our bodies, right? Whether that's I have to fart, or I need to adjust my knee, or I got to change positions, or actually, I really need to stop. Like that's huge to be able to notice and articulate and ask for in a partnership, right? I need to stop. I need to slow down. Can we take a break? Like those are some really big deal things that come up as we start to really, really tune in. So just because you're suddenly, fully in your body and fully present doesn't mean it's going to be all spectacular. I think it's all in service of the spectacular, right? Like the more I cry during sex, the more I feel safe. The more I feel safe, the more I can become more orgasmic. The more orgasmic I feel, the more open I feel. The more open I feel, the more emotional I feel, right? So it really is this like beautiful upward spiral. And we are 3 years in and having the best sex of my life, the most amazing orgasms that I didn't even know existed a few years ago. And I don't want to speak for Christopher, but I know he's having similar experiences as well. Like, I didn't know it could feel like this, right? And this is not because, and this is because we have put all of these concepts and all of these ideas into practice.
Can
So
I add
just
something to that?
as you start to open up to this work, as you start to unfreeze, just know that lots of other stuff might come up as well. Yeah.
So to speak of my experience of Andrea's orgasmic capacity and to kind of contextualize this for y'all, she discovered that capacity on her own. And then she brought it into our sexual play. Now, I think she would also tell you that the foundation of safety of this relationship allowed her to find that capacity in herself and then bring it back. But here you see the nuance between solo eroticism and partnered eroticism, right? So one of my specialties as a therapist is working with polyamorous folks and open folks. And I say, okay, if you're not good with one, beware of two. If you're not good with two, beware of three, right? So you kind of see how it goes. But that is something I think in what the example she gave, and she credits me, which I love and I appreciate, but I also see her, right? So again, it's, what's your dedication to your own eroticism? What are your partner's dedication to their own eroticism? Are you finding somebody who can match your level? That matters. And to be honest with it, not mean, but honest, kind and direct about it, of like, oh, okay, this is a priority for me, like me in my prior relationship, but not a priority for them. Okay, then what do I do with that? Right. And so that's where Andrea really shines a light for all of us. And, we talk about these solo sexual practices and these masturbatory practices like they're just, breathing, walking, or eating. I know that there's a lot of shame for a lot of people around solo sex, right? So that may be part of what you have to unwind as you embrace the erotic within, is how do I find it in myself? And then am I in a partnership where that part of me is welcome, where that part of me is desired, where that part of me can be safe, right? So that's the two-step I would recommend, is where is it in me? Now, is it safe to express this newfound part of me in the context I'm in?
Thank you. Okay, so I want to drop us into practice. I see that there's a really fabulous question in the chat. So I see your question. It's an awesome question. I think it totally aligns with this, but I want to save it for the Q&A. So I want to give people the chance who want to practice the chance to practice, and then we'll move into Q&A, and we'll take this question first once we drop in. If you have other questions, please drop them in. But assuming you're not driving,